The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my son's attorney shuffling papers. I sat there, my hands trembling in my lap, watching my own child testify against me. His words were measured, clinical, describing me as unstable, forgetful, unable to manage my own affairs. The judge looked at me with something between pity and suspicion. That was the moment I understood how completely I had lost. But this isn't where my story begins. To understand how I ended up there, I need to take you back 3 months earlier to a life that looked perfect from the outside. My name is Janet Morrison, and for 62 years, I thought I understood how the world worked. I lived in a comfortable home in Phoenix, Arizona, with a view of the Camelback Mountain that turned golden every sunset. My son David was a successful financial advisor. My daughter-in-law Karen worked in real estate. My granddaughter Emma was about to turn 8. From the outside, we were the picture of an American family. Sunday dinners around the table, Christmas cards with everyone smiling, birthdays celebrated with homemade cake. I was the grandmother who baked cookies and kept photo albums and never missed a school play. David had always been my pride. After his father passed away 15 years ago, we grew closer, or so I thought. He called every week. He helped me with my finances, my taxes, my insurance paperwork. When the car made a strange noise, David took it to the mechanic. When I needed to renew my mortgage, David handled the paperwork. He was such a good son. Everyone said so. My neighbors would comment on how lucky I was to have a child who cared so much. The first crack appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. We were at a family barbecue at David's house, one of those perfect Arizona afternoons with the smell of mesquite on the grill and Emma running through the sprinkler in the backyard. I was telling a story about my college roommate, something funny that had happened decades ago. Halfway through, I paused, trying to remember her name. Not unusual at my age, right? But David jumped in immediately, his voice carrying just a hint of concern that everyone could hear. "It's okay, Mom," he said, touching my shoulder. "You've been forgetting little things lately. It's nothing to worry about." I hadn't been forgetting things, but the way he said it, with that gentle, patronizing tone, made me doubt myself. The other relatives exchanged those quick glances people make when they're uncomfortable. Karen gave me a sympathetic smile that felt like acid. I finished my story, but the moment had shifted. I was no longer Janet telling a funny anecdote. I was Janet whose memory was going. Janet who needed to be handled carefully. That night, I lay in bed replaying the scene. Had I been forgetting things? I went through my recent days like inventory. I had paid all my bills on time. I had driven to the grocery store without incident. I had balanced my checkbook to the penny. But doubt has a way of seeping in through the smallest cracks. Maybe I was forgetting things and didn't realize it. Maybe my son, who loved me, was seeing something I couldn't see. I got up and checked my calendar, the physical one I kept by the refrigerator, filled with my handwriting noting appointments, social engagements, reminders. Everything was there, organized, current. My bills folder sat on the desk in the study. Every statement filed chronologically, every payment recorded. I even pulled out my checkbook and verified the balance against my bank statement online. Perfect alignment. Not a single discrepancy. Standing there in my study at 1 a.m, surrounded by evidence of my competence, I should have felt reassured. Instead, I felt more confused. If I was managing everything so well, why was David so concerned? Was he seeing something subtle? Some early sign of decline I couldn't detect myself? Medical shows on TV were always talking about how dementia patients don't know they have dementia. What if that was me? I spent another hour going through photo albums, testing my memory. Could I remember when each picture was taken? Who was there? What we were celebrating? Every single memory came back sharp and clear. Emma's first birthday, the cake shaped like a teddy bear. David's college graduation, how proud I'd felt watching him walk across that stage. My husband's last birthday before the cancer diagnosis, his smile genuine even though he must have already been feeling sick. But none of that mattered, I realized with a sinking feeling, because David had planted the seed of doubt not just in my mind, but in everyone else's. Even if I could prove to myself that I was fine, the family had seen that moment at the barbecue. They had watched him gently correct his forgetful mother. The narrative was already being written, and I wasn't the one holding the pen. The comments increased in frequency. At Emma's soccer game, I mentioned I had taken a different route to the field. David laughed and told the other parents I was getting adventurous in my old age, couldn't stick to the familiar roads anymore. When I showed up to dinner wearing a new blouse, he asked if I had forgotten we were supposed to dress casually. I hadn't forgotten anything. There was no dress code. But he said it with such conviction that I started questioning my own memory of our conversation. You see, reputational attack isn't like physical violence. It doesn't leave bruises you can photograph or broken bones you can X-ray. It's insidious, a slow poison that seeps into how people perceive you. David was brilliant at it. He never said anything overtly cruel. He was always concerned, always caring, always just trying to help his poor mother, who was getting older and maybe not as sharp as she used to be. And people believed him because why wouldn't they? He was such a devoted son. I started keeping a journal, writing down conversations and events, trying to create a record of reality I could trust. But even as I wrote, I wondered if I was being paranoid. Maybe he really was just worried about me. Maybe I was overreacting. Self-blame is a comfortable prison. If this was my fault, if I was the problem, then I had control. I could fix it by being better, sharper, more careful. The alternative, that my own son was systematically destroying my reputation, was too painful to accept. So I believed it was me. I blamed myself for every moment of confusion, even when the confusion was manufactured. When David told the family I had called him at 3 a.m. worried about nothing, I apologized profusely, even though I had no memory of making that call, and my phone records showed no such call existed. When he mentioned I had missed a doctor's appointment, I felt terrible, even though I had never scheduled one. The lies became my reality because accepting them was easier than accepting the truth about my son. The sacrifices started small. David suggested he should handle my investments since I was getting overwhelmed. I wasn't overwhelmed, but I agreed, thinking it would ease his concerns about me. He recommended I add his name to my bank accounts, just in case I needed help. Just in case, he said. Like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. I signed the papers. He was my son. I trusted him. Then came the bigger things. David thought I should consider moving closer to him, maybe into a smaller place that would be easier to manage. I loved my house. I had lived there for 30 years. Every room held memories of my husband, of raising my children, of building a life. But David was so persistent, so convincing about how hard it must be for me to maintain it alone. He brought over brochures for assisted living communities, places with names like Sunset Gardens and Golden Years Residence that sounded more like funeral homes than homes for living. I gave up my book club. David said the evening drives were dangerous for someone my age. I gave up my volunteer work at the library. He worried I was overextending myself. I gave up my weekly lunch with my oldest friend Martha because David mentioned she seemed like a bad influence, always getting me worked up about politics. One by one, I surrendered the pieces of my life that made me who I was. My autonomy dissolved like sugar in water, so gradually I didn't notice until it was gone. I stopped making decisions without David's input. What to eat for dinner, what TV show to watch, whether to get my hair cut. I would call him first, check if he thought it was a good idea. He had convinced me I couldn't trust my own judgment. And when you can't trust yourself, you become a shadow. You stop existing as a person and become a reflection of what someone else wants you to be. I forgot what it felt like to want something just for myself. I forgot what it felt like to be Janet, not David's mother who needed help. Looking back now, I can see how textbook it all was. The isolation, the erosion of confidence, the gradual takeover of my life. But when you're in it, when it's your own child doing it, it's invisible. You tell yourself stories about how he cares, how he's protecting you, how lucky you are to have someone who pays attention. You don't see the cage being built around you one bar at a time. I thought about leaving. Not physically leaving, but emotionally extracting myself, setting boundaries. But every time I tried, David would do something sweet. He would bring Emma over for an afternoon. He would cook my favorite meal. He would tell me how much he loved me and how worried he was about me living alone. And I would melt because he was my son, and I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe that his love was real, not a tool for manipulation. The sacrifice of autonomy is peculiar because you participate in your own imprisonment. Every time I handed over another piece of control, I told myself I was choosing it. I was being smart, being responsible, accepting help. But choice requires alternatives, and David had carefully eliminated all my alternatives. He had isolated me from friends. He had convinced the family I was declining. He had positioned himself as my only lifeline. And in that position, his help wasn't help at all. It was domination dressed up in concern. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever looked at a situation and thought, am I crazy or is something very wrong here? That's where I lived for months, in that space between knowing something was wrong and being unable to name it. Because naming it meant accepting that my son, my own flesh and blood, the baby I had nursed and raised and loved with everything I had, was betraying me in the cruelest way possible. The worst part wasn't what he was taking from me. It was what I was giving away willingly, believing I had no choice. My dignity, my independence, my sense of self. I became smaller and quieter and more apologetic, always trying to prove I was still capable, still worth keeping around. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The woman who had raised 2 children alone after her husband's death, who had worked as a nurse for 30 years, who had stood up to hospital administrators and insurance companies, and anyone who tried to push her around, that woman had vanished. In her place was someone timid and uncertain, always second-guessing, always asking permission to exist. At Emma's 7th birthday party, I brought a gift, a beautiful dollhouse I had seen and knew she would love. When she opened it, her face lit up, but David's face darkened. Later, in the kitchen, he pulled me aside. His voice was low but sharp, like he was talking to a child who had misbehaved. He told me I should have asked him first before buying something so expensive, that I needed to be more careful with money at my age, that he was worried about my judgment. The dollhouse cost $90. I had thousands in my savings, but standing there in his kitchen with the smell of birthday cake in the air and the sound of children laughing in the next room, I felt ashamed. I apologized. I promised to check with him next time. And he hugged me and told me it was okay. He just wanted to protect me. That hug felt like a straitjacket. That night, I cried for the first time in months. Not sad tears exactly. Frustrated tears, angry tears I didn't know what to do with. Because how do you be angry at someone who says they love you? How do you fight someone who insists they're helping? The cage had no visible bars, so how could I explain to anyone that I was trapped? Who would believe me? David was so convincing, so devoted, so perfect in his role as the concerned son. I realize now that's exactly what he was counting on, that I would stay silent, that I would keep sacrificing pieces of myself until there was nothing left but an empty shell he could control completely. And I probably would have, if my body hadn't started screaming what my voice couldn't say. The heart palpitations started in March. At first, I ignored them, just stress, I told myself. But they got worse. My chest would tighten randomly, my pulse racing for no reason. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I dropped 12 pounds in a month. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed. The physical symptoms were frightening, but what scared me more was how disconnected I felt from my own body. I would be sitting on the couch watching television, and suddenly my heart would start hammering like I was running a marathon. My hands would shake. Sweat would bead on my forehead. I'd have to grip the armrest and focus on breathing, counting inhales and exhales, until the episode passed. At night, sleep became a distant memory. I would lie in the dark, my mind racing through every interaction with David, every comment, every subtle manipulation, trying to understand what was happening to me. The clock would mock me as hours passed. 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. When I finally did drift off, I'd wake up gasping, having dreamed that I was trapped in a room with no doors, my voice gone, unable to call for help. Food lost all appeal. Everything tasted like cardboard. My favorite meals, the ones I'd cooked for decades, suddenly seemed impossible to swallow. I would sit at my kitchen table with a plate of food growing cold in front of me, forcing myself to take a few bites before giving up. My clothes started hanging off my frame. My wedding ring, which had fit perfectly for 40 years, began sliding around on my finger. David noticed, of course. He made a doctor's appointment for me without asking, just informed me when I needed to be ready. The old me would have bristled at the presumption, insisted on making my own appointments. The new me, the diminished me, just nodded and wrote down the time. Dr. Sarah Chen had been my physician for 8 years. She was thorough, no nonsense, the kind of doctor who actually listened. She took one look at me and ordered a full workup. Blood pressure, heart monitor, blood tests, the works. But before any of that, she sat me down in her office and asked me a question that changed everything. "Janet," she said, her dark eyes serious behind her glasses, "what's happening in your life?" I opened my mouth to say nothing. Everything's fine, but something broke. Maybe it was her kindness. Maybe it was how sick I felt. Maybe it was just time. The words poured out. I told her about David, about the comments and the control and the slow disappearance of my life. I told her I thought I was going crazy. I told her I didn't know what was real anymore. My voice cracked as I described the incident at the barbecue, how he'd made me feel incompetent in front of the whole family. I told her about the phone calls he claimed I'd made but had no memory of making. About how he'd convinced me to give up my book club, my volunteer work, my friends. About the legal documents he'd prepared that would give him immediate control over everything I owned. The words tumbled out faster and faster, months of silence breaking like a dam. I told her about lying awake at night wondering if I was losing my mind, about checking and rechecking my calendar and my bank statements to prove to myself I was still capable. About the shame I felt, the constant apologizing, the way I'd started asking his permission for everything. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious with each revelation, but she never interrupted, never looked shocked or disbelieving. She just nodded, her eyes full of understanding that made me feel seen for the first time in months. When I finally ran out of words, when the flood became a trickle and then stopped, I felt hollow and exposed, like I'd turned myself inside out. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she pulled out a pamphlet and slid it across the desk. The title read, "Elder Abuse, Recognizing the Signs." My hands shook as I picked it up. Elder abuse. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's story. Abuse happened to other people, vulnerable people, people who weren't as educated or aware as me. Not to a retired nurse who had spent 3 decades taking care of others. Not to me. But as I read the bullet points, each one hit like a physical blow. Isolation from friends and family. Check. Financial exploitation or attempts to control finances. Check. Undermining the victim's confidence and independence. Check. Making the victim doubt their own perception of reality. Check, check, check. The list described my life with such precision, it could have been written specifically about David and me. "Janet," Dr. Chen said gently, "over 5 million seniors are abused every year in this country. The majority of that abuse comes from family members, and psychological abuse is the most common form. What you're describing isn't in your head. It's a pattern, a deliberate pattern." I sat there, the pamphlet trembling in my hands, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. All those months of thinking I was the problem, that I was failing as a mother, that I was losing my mind. All those months, and I had been the victim. My own son had been systematically abusing me. The word felt too big, too serious. Abuse was for other people, for strangers, for bad families, not for us, not for David. But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. She pulled up my medical history on her computer and showed me the pattern. 6 visits in the last year, all stress-related. Elevated cortisol levels, high blood pressure, insomnia, weight loss. She showed me notes from previous appointments where I had mentioned feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like I couldn't cope. My body had been trying to tell me what my mind couldn't accept. I was being destroyed slowly from the inside out. "You need to take control back," Dr. Chen said, looking me straight in the eye. "Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now. Your health depends on it. Your life depends on it." I walked out of that office in a daze. It was one of those perfect Arizona days, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. People were going about their normal lives, shopping, driving, laughing, and I was standing there realizing my entire reality had been a lie. The caring son was a manipulator, the help was control, the love was a weapon. Everything I had believed about my family, about myself, had been carefully constructed fiction. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I made a decision without asking David first. I called my old friend Martha, the one he had convinced me was a bad influence. She answered on the second ring, surprise and warmth in her voice. We hadn't talked in almost a year. I told her I wanted to meet for lunch. She said yes immediately, asked if I was okay, didn't push when I said I would explain in person. My hand was shaking as I hung up the phone. Such a simple thing, making lunch plans with a friend, but it felt monumental, revolutionary even. I had made a choice based solely on what I wanted, not on what David would approve of or think was appropriate. The anxiety that usually accompanied any independent decision was there, buzzing under my skin, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like the first green shoot of spring pushing through frozen ground. Hope, maybe, or defiance. The next morning, I woke up and realized I'd slept through the night for the first time in weeks. 6 solid hours. No nightmares. No waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing. My body seemed to understand, before my mind did, that I was starting to take control back, that the suffocating weight was beginning to lift. Sitting across from Martha at the diner we used to frequent, I felt like I was coming back to life. She looked the same, still wearing her reading glasses on a chain, still ordering coffee with too much cream. The familiar booth, the smell of bacon and coffee, the murmur of other conversations around us, it all felt like coming home after a long, disorienting journey. We talked for 3 hours. I told her everything. Every detail, every incident, every moment of doubt and confusion. She listened the way only an old friend can, with her whole attention, refilling my coffee cup, reaching across to squeeze my hand at the hardest parts. She didn't look shocked. She looked sad and knowing, like she had suspected all along but hadn't known how to reach me. When I finally wound down, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter, Martha sat back and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "The last time I saw you, at the grocery store about a year ago, you seemed different, smaller somehow, less you. I tried to call after that, but David always had a reason why you couldn't talk." "I tried to call you," Martha said, "several times. David always said you were busy or resting or not feeling well. Eventually, I figured you didn't want to talk to me anymore." More lies, more isolation. David had been screening my calls, controlling my access to the outside world, making sure I stayed dependent on him. The realization made me feel sick and furious in equal measure. How many other friends had tried to reach me? How many connections had he severed while pretending to protect me? Martha reached across the table and took my hand. "What are you going to do?" I didn't know yet, but I knew I wasn't going to keep letting him destroy me. Dr. Chen's words echoed in my head. Take control back. Now. Not tomorrow. Now. The question was how. David had positioned himself so carefully, made himself indispensable, convinced everyone I needed his help. If I accused him, who would believe me? He was the devoted son. I was the forgetful mother. My word against his, and he had been building his case for months. I needed proof, not just for other people, but for myself. Something undeniable, something that would force everyone, including me, to see what had been happening. I started that day. I went home and began documenting everything. I wrote down every conversation I could remember. I made copies of my bank statements and medical records. I noted every instance where David had lied about me or to me. The evidence piled up quickly, a mountain of small cruelties and deliberate manipulations. But I needed more. I needed something that would make it impossible for him to explain away, to reframe as concern. I needed to catch him in the act of betrayal so clear that even he couldn't spin it. And that's when I started forming a plan. It felt strange, almost wrong, to be strategic about my own son. But he had been strategic about me for months. It was time to fight back. The idea came from an unexpected source, my neighbor Marjorie. I barely knew her before all this happened. She lived 2 houses down, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair she wore short and a direct way of speaking that some people found off-putting. I found it refreshing. She had seen me struggling to bring groceries in one afternoon and came over to help. It was a Thursday, I remember, because the grocery store had been crowded with people doing their weekly shopping. I had bought more than usual, trying to stock up so I wouldn't have to make another trip soon. David had been making comments about my driving lately, suggesting maybe I should limit how often I got behind the wheel. The grocery bags were heavy, cutting into my hands as I tried to carry them from the car to the house in one trip. Marjorie appeared at my elbow like a guardian angel, taking half the bags without asking, her strong hands making light work of what I'd been struggling with. "Let me help you with these," she said, in that no-nonsense way of hers. It wasn't a question or an offer that could be refused. It was a statement of fact. She was helping, and that was that. We got to talking on my front porch, the kind of accidental conversation that sometimes changes everything. She set the bags down, and instead of leaving, she settled into one of the wicker chairs like she had all the time in the world. I don't know why I opened up to her. Maybe because she was outside my family circle, outside David's reach. Maybe because she asked the right question at the right time. Maybe because I was so starved for genuine human connection that even a near stranger's kindness could unlock what I'd been holding back. She said, "You look like someone carrying a weight they shouldn't have to carry alone." Her blue eyes were direct, kind, but unflinching. I recognized that look. I wore it myself once. Something about the way she said it made me trust her. I told her a condensed version of what was happening. She listened, nodding occasionally, her expression getting grimmer. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or try to find excuses for David's behavior. She didn't suggest I was overreacting or that things would work themselves out. Instead, she said something I'll never forget. "Janet," she said, "I know what you're going through. My son pulled the same thing on me 15 years ago. Spent 3 years trying to get me declared incompetent so he could control my money. I barely escaped with my dignity intact." I stared at her. She looked so normal, so put together. I had never guessed she carried that kind of history. She saw my expression and smiled sadly. "You'd be surprised how common it is. We don't talk about it because we're ashamed. Because they're our children, and we're supposed to love them unconditionally. But love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you." Over the next few weeks, Marjorie became my lifeline. She understood in a way no one else could. She had walked this path already, knew the pitfalls, knew how to protect yourself when your own family becomes the enemy. She helped me think strategically instead of emotionally. She reminded me that I deserved better, that age didn't mean I had to accept mistreatment, that being a mother didn't require being a victim. We fell into a routine. Every few days, I would walk over to her house and we'd sit in her sunny kitchen drinking tea and planning my liberation. That's how I started to think of it, not as fighting back or confronting David, but as liberating myself. Marjorie's kitchen became my war room, my safe house, my sanctuary. She shared details of her own experience, not to make it about her, but to help me understand the patterns, to show me I wasn't alone. Her son had been even more aggressive, actually filing legal papers to have her declared incompetent. She'd had to hire attorneys, undergo psychiatric evaluations, prove her competence in court. The process had been humiliating and expensive, but she'd won, and more importantly, she'd survived with her autonomy intact. The hardest part, she told me one afternoon, her hands wrapped around her teacup, was accepting that my son wasn't who I thought he was. I kept making excuses for him, kept believing that deep down he loved me and was just confused or misguided. But Janet, people who love you don't try to steal your life, period. Once I accepted that, once I stopped making excuses for him, I could finally fight back effectively. Her words hit hard because I was still doing exactly that, making excuses for David in my head. He's stressed, he means well, he just doesn't realize what he's doing. But Marjorie was right. David knew exactly what he was doing. The systematic nature of it proved that. This wasn't confusion or concern, it was calculated exploitation. "You need to test him," Marjorie said one afternoon over tea in her kitchen. "You need to give him an opportunity to either do the right thing or reveal himself completely, something with stakes high enough that his true intentions become obvious." We brainstormed for days. It had to be something believable, something that wouldn't tip him off that I was onto him. It needed to be tempting enough that if he had ulterior motives, he wouldn't be able to resist showing his hand. Finally, we settled on a plan. I would ask David to help me with legal documents, estate planning paperwork that needed updating. It was the perfect test. If he was genuinely concerned about helping me, he would handle it honestly, maybe recommend I consult with an independent attorney. If he was manipulating me for control and money, he would try to insert provisions that benefited him, counting on my trust and my manufactured confusion to get me to sign without fully understanding. I called David and told him I wanted to update my will and power of attorney documents. He sounded pleased, said he thought it was a very responsible decision. We scheduled a meeting at his office for the following Tuesday. I spent the days leading up to it rehearsing my role, practicing being the confused, dependent mother he expected. Marjorie helped me prepare, reminded me to stay calm, to observe carefully, to document everything. The morning of the meeting, I felt sick with nerves. This was my son. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that he would prove himself trustworthy, that all my suspicions were paranoid delusions. But I knew better. Dr. Chen's words, the pamphlet on elder abuse, the pattern of control and isolation, it was all too clear. I just needed David to confirm it. His office was in a sleek building in downtown Phoenix, all glass and steel. David's secretary greeted me warmly, offered me coffee. I sat in the waiting area, looking at the photos on the wall. David with various clients, David receiving awards, David shaking hands with local politicians. Success, respectability, the perfect cover for someone slowly stealing his mother's life. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these pictures of David helping people, building trust, being the reliable financial advisor everyone could count on. How many of his clients knew what he was really capable of? How many elderly clients had he manipulated the same way he was manipulating me? The state board investigation would eventually reveal he'd done exactly that. But sitting there in his waiting area, I just felt sick looking at his smiling face in photo after photo. The recording device in my purse felt heavy, conspicuous, even though Marjorie had assured me it was small and undetectable. My phone was in there too, set to record as backup. I needed evidence, not just of what the document said, but of how he tried to pressure me into signing them. Marjorie had coached me on what to listen for, the manipulation tactics he would likely use: gaslighting, guilt-tripping, appealing to my trust, making me feel incompetent or confused. When he called me into his office, his smile was warm and reassuring. He came around the desk to hug me, and I had to force myself not to stiffen, to play my role as the trusting mother. His office smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Everything was pristine, organized, designed to project competence and control, just like David himself. He had already drafted the documents, he said, just needed my signature. Red flag number 1. A legitimate attorney would have consulted with me about what I wanted before drafting anything. But David had prepared everything in advance, ready for me to simply sign. He walked me through them, his tone patient and slightly condescending, like he was explaining something to a child who couldn't possibly understand complex adult matters. Most of it was standard language, or seemed to be. Trust provisions, healthcare directives, asset distribution. But then I noticed a clause that gave him complete control over my finances and medical decisions, effective immediately, not upon incapacity. Not if I became unable to manage my own affairs. Immediately. The moment I signed, David would have the legal right to access my bank accounts, make my healthcare decisions, sell my house, everything. And I would have no recourse because I'd have given him that power voluntarily. Why does this take effect now? I asked, keeping my voice uncertain, playing my role. David's expression didn't change. It's just a formality, Mom. It means I can help you right away if you need it. Don't you trust me? There it was, the manipulation dressed up as hurt feelings, the implication that questioning him meant I doubted his love. I had fallen for that line so many times, but not today. Today I saw it for what it was, a trap. Of course I trust you, I said, picking up the pen. I just want to make sure I understand. He relaxed slightly, thinking he had won. You don't need to worry about the details. That's what I'm here for. I pretended to sign, then paused. Actually, do you mind if I take these home to read more carefully? I just want to be sure. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mom, we talked about this. You know how you get confused with legal language. Just sign them and let me handle it. I know, honey, but I'd still like to read them tonight. I promise I'll bring them back signed tomorrow. The mask slipped for just a second. I saw frustration flash across his face, quickly covered by that patient smile. If that's what you want. But don't forget, okay? This is important. I left his office with the unsigned documents in my bag and a recording device in my pocket. Marjorie had lent it to me, insisted I needed proof of how he spoke to me when he thought he had me cornered. I had it all. His condescension, his manipulation, the document that would have given him total control over my life. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of me and cried. Not tears of sadness this time, tears of rage and relief. Relief that I hadn't been crazy, that my instincts had been right. Rage that my own son had gotten this far, had come this close to trapping me completely. The document was damning. No attorney drafting a standard power of attorney would include those terms unless specifically instructed to do so by the client. I called Marjorie. She came over immediately, read through the documents, shook her head in disgust. This is financial exploitation, pure and simple, she said. He was going to lock you out of your own life. What do I do now? I asked. She looked at me seriously. You fight back. You stop protecting him. You tell the truth to people who matter. You take your life back. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I consulted with an attorney Marjorie recommended, someone who specialized in elder law. Elizabeth Brennan was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She listened to my story without interruption, reviewed the documents David had prepared, and shook her head in disgust. This is textbook financial exploitation, she said, tapping the problematic clause with her pen. These provisions have no legitimate purpose except to give him total control over your life. And the way he tried to rush you into signing without independent legal review, that's predatory behavior. She helped me understand my legal options. I could file for a restraining order if I felt physically threatened, though in my case the abuse was psychological and financial rather than physical. I could report him to the state board that licensed financial advisors. I could press criminal charges for attempted financial exploitation. Each option had implications, consequences that would ripple through my family and David's career. What do you want, Janet? Elizabeth asked me. Not what you think you should want, Not what would keep the peace. What do you actually want? I sat with that question for a long moment. What did I want? I wanted my son back, the little boy who used to hold my hand and tell me I was the best mom in the world. But that boy was gone, if he'd ever really existed. The man who tried to steal my life wasn't that child. So what did I want from this man? I want him to face consequences, I said finally. I want people to know what he did, and I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. Then we'll build a case. We'll document everything. And we'll make sure that when this comes to light, there's no ambiguity about what happened. I gathered all my documentation, every piece of evidence I had collected. The journal entries, the bank statements showing the access David had, the medical records documenting my stress-related health issues, the recording from our meeting in his office, the unsigned legal documents with their predatory clauses, phone records disproving his claims about calls I'd supposedly made, everything. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and transferred my money there. Watching the balance move from the account David could access to one that was mine alone felt like breaking chains. I changed all my passwords, created new security questions he couldn't guess the answers to. I revoked the access David had to my accounts and my personal information. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, like watching my reflection come back into focus after months of being blurred. But the hardest part was still ahead. I needed to confront David publicly, in front of the family who had believed his lies about me. I needed them to see what he had been doing. It terrified me. The thought of calling out my own son, of forcing everyone to choose sides, of potentially destroying our family. But Marjorie reminded me that David had already destroyed the family. He had destroyed it the moment he decided to betray me. I was just making the destruction visible. People will be angry at you, Marjorie warned me. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you're forcing them to see something uncomfortable. They'll want to believe this is a misunderstanding or an overreaction, because accepting the truth means accepting that they missed the signs, that they believed his lies, that they failed to protect you. Some of them won't be able to handle that. She was right, of course. But I couldn't live the rest of my life as a supporting character in David's fiction about the confused old woman who needed his help. I needed to tell my truth, loudly and publicly, regardless of who it made uncomfortable. We decided to do it at Emma's 8th birthday party. David had organized it at his house, a big gathering with extended family and friends. The irony wasn't lost on me, confronting him at a child's birthday party. But it was the only time everyone would be together, the only opportunity to speak my truth to an audience that needed to hear it. The day of the party, I felt like I was walking to my execution. Marjorie came with me, moral support and witness. The house was decorated with balloons and streamers, Emma running around in a princess dress, everyone laughing and eating cake. The perfect family scene. I almost lost my nerve, almost convinced myself to stay quiet, to preserve this illusion of harmony. Then David made a comment. Someone asked where I had been lately, why they hadn't seen me around much. David laughed, that easy, charming laugh, and said, "Oh, you know how Mom is these days. She forgets we make plans sometimes. We're working on getting her more organized." The lie was so casual, so practiced, and everyone nodded sympathetically, looked at me with that pitying expression I had come to hate. That's when I knew I had to do it. I couldn't let him keep rewriting reality, keep making me disappear one lie at a time. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice came out clear and strong. "Actually, David, I need to talk to you. All of you." The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me. David's smile froze on his face. Karen stopped cutting the cake. Even the kids seemed to sense something was happening. "I need to tell you all something," I said. "Something I should have said months ago. David hasn't been helping me. He's been controlling me, manipulating me, lying about me to all of you. You could have heard a pin drop. David recovered quickly, his expression shifting to concern. "Mom, what are you talking about? Maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," I said firmly. "This needs to be public. Because you made your lies public. You told everyone I was forgetting things, getting confused, unable to manage my own life. But it was all lies, designed to make you look like the good son and me look incompetent." I pulled out the documents from my bag. Last week, David tried to get me to sign papers that would have given him complete control over my money and my medical decisions. Not if I became incapable. Immediately. He tried to pressure me into signing them without reading them, told me I was too confused to understand legal language. I saw family members exchanging glances, doubt creeping into their expressions. Good. They needed to doubt. David's face was turning red, but he kept his voice calm. "Mom, you're misunderstanding. Those were standard documents for your protection. Then why did they include clauses that would let you access my accounts right away? Why did they give you the power to make medical decisions even though I'm perfectly capable? Why did you tell the family I called you at 3 a.m. when my phone records show I didn't? Why did you say I missed a doctor's appointment I never scheduled?" The questions hung in the air. I saw people's faces changing, the pieces clicking together. Martha, who I hadn't seen in almost a year, spoke up from the back of the room. I tried to call Janet several times. David told me she was too tired to talk, that she didn't want to be bothered. Were those lies too? David was cornered now. His wife Karen looked shocked, like she was seeing him for the first time. His face went through several expressions, anger, fear, calculation, before settling on wounded innocence. "I can't believe you would accuse me of this. After everything I've done for you. I was trying to help you, Mom. If you don't want my help, fine. But don't make me into a villain." "I'm not making you into anything," I said. My voice was shaking now, but I pushed through. "I'm just finally telling the truth. You isolated me from my friends. You undermined my confidence. You made me doubt my own sanity. You were setting up to take control of my life completely. That's not help. That's abuse." The word landed like a bomb. Several people gasped. Emma started crying, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. But I couldn't stop now. I needed them to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. Research shows that psychological abuse is the most common form of elder abuse, affecting 28 to 62% of victims, I said. I learned that from my doctor after she diagnosed me with stress-related health problems caused by what was happening in my life. I lost 12 pounds. My blood pressure skyrocketed. I couldn't sleep. And all the while, David was telling everyone I was just getting older, maybe declining a bit. He was killing me slowly while playing the concerned son. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some defending David, others demanding answers. My daughter-in-law Karen was staring at her husband like he was a stranger. David's brother Mark looked furious. Emma was being taken to another room by a cousin, away from the adult drama. And David was looking at me with pure hatred. The mask had finally dropped completely. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "You just destroyed this family." "No," I said. "You destroyed it. I'm just making everyone see what you did." Marjorie stepped forward, her presence solid and reassuring beside me. "I've been where Janet is," she told the room. "I know how hard it is to speak up against your own child, but she's telling the truth. I've seen the documents, I've heard the recordings, and if any of you care about her, you'll listen." The party dissolved after that. Some people left immediately, uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others stayed, wanting to hear more, wanting to understand. Karen pulled me aside later, tears in her eyes, apologizing for not seeing what was happening. She said she had noticed changes in David over the past year, a controlling streak she had attributed to stress at work. Now she was questioning everything about their marriage. Mark, David's brother, was the biggest surprise. He came up to me with his jaw set and said, "I should have known something was wrong. Dad always said David had a mean streak when he didn't get his way. I just never thought he'd turn it on you." The fallout was swift and devastating. Karen filed for divorce within a week, citing financial irregularities and emotional abuse she was now recognizing in their relationship. When she sat down with her own attorney and started reviewing their finances, she found things that shocked her. Joint accounts she didn't know about, investments made without her knowledge, money moved around in ways she couldn't explain. She called me the day after she filed, her voice shaking with anger and humiliation. "How did I not see it?" she kept asking. "How did I live with him for 12 years and not know what he was doing?" I understood her question intimately. "Because we see what we want to see," I told her. "And because people like David are very, very good at hiding who they really are. They show us the version of themselves we want to believe in." Karen told me she'd been reviewing their marriage with new eyes, seeing patterns she'd missed or explained away. The way David controlled their social calendar. How he'd isolated her from her own family, convincing her they were toxic or demanding. The small put-downs disguised as jokes. The way he managed all their finances and got angry when she asked questions. It had all been there, and she'd normalized it, the same way I had normalized his treatment of me. Mark, David's brother, stopped speaking to David entirely. He came to my house the day after the party, his jaw tight with rage. "I should have known," he said. "Dad used to warn me about David's mean streak. I thought he was exaggerating, being hard on him. But Dad saw something I didn't want to see." Other family members took sides, but the majority landed on mine once they started questioning all the little things David had said about me over the months. The stories didn't hold up under scrutiny. I supposedly couldn't remember appointments, but when they checked with me, I had detailed records of every commitment. I supposedly got confused easily, but when they talked to me directly, I was articulate and sharp. The timeline of my supposed decline was inconsistent, the evidence non-existent. My doctor provided a statement confirming I had no cognitive issues whatsoever, that my recent health problems were entirely stress-related and had already begun improving once the source of stress was removed. Dr. Chen didn't name David specifically in the medical statement, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew who had been causing my stress. David tried to spin it, claimed I was having a mental health crisis, that I was being manipulated by Marjorie and others who wanted to turn me against him. He positioned himself as the victim of a conspiracy, the good son being attacked by a mother who was unstable and vindictive. But the evidence was too clear. The documents spoke for themselves, black and white proof of his intentions. His own wife confirmed his pattern of control and manipulation. The recordings from his office showed exactly how he'd tried to pressure me. He lost his reputation, his marriage, his relationship with most of the family. The successful financial advisor, the devoted son, all of it crumbled. And I wish I could say I felt nothing but satisfaction watching it happen. But the truth was more complicated. Part of me mourned. Part of me felt guilty, like I was the one who had destroyed him rather than him destroying himself. That's how deep the conditioning went, how thoroughly he'd trained me to protect him even when he was hurting me. The state board investigated him based on my complaint and found irregularities in how he handled other clients' accounts too. Elderly clients, people who trusted him. The pattern was there once someone looked. He lost his license, his business dissolved. He had to move out of his beautiful house in Scottsdale, the one with the pool and the view. Everything he had built, his whole careful construction of success and respectability came apart. I wish I could say I felt nothing watching his downfall. But I'm not that cold. Part of me, the mother who had raised him and loved him, grieved. I grieved for the son I thought I had, the one who existed before greed and entitlement twisted him into someone unrecognizable. But another part of me, The part that had been systematically destroyed and almost erased felt something that can only be described as justice. He tried to contact me several times in the weeks after the party, left voicemails claiming I had ruined his life, that I would regret what I had done, that I was a vindictive old woman who couldn't stand to see him successful. I listened to each message once, then deleted it. His words had no power over me anymore. I had taken control back, just like Dr. Chen said. I had reclaimed my own narrative. The legal consequences came slowly, but inevitably. I pressed charges for attempted financial exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming. David pled guilty, probably on advice from his attorney, to avoid a trial that would have been even more public and humiliating. He got probation, community service, and a permanent mark on his record. Some people thought I was harsh. How could I send my own son through the legal system? But I had learned something important through all of this. Love doesn't mean enabling abuse. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone to continue hurting you. And being a mother doesn't require sacrificing your dignity, your safety, your very self on the altar of family loyalty. David made choices. He faced consequences. That's not cruelty. That's accountability. The real victory wasn't his legal troubles or his financial losses. It was what happened inside me. For the first time in over a year, I could breathe. I could make decisions without second-guessing myself. I could trust my own mind again. The fog of manipulation lifted, and I saw my life clearly. I saw how much I had lost and how much I could still reclaim. 3 months after the birthday party confrontation, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to move, not to an assisted living facility like David had wanted, not to a smaller apartment to make things easier. I moved to a new town entirely, Sedona, Arizona, about 2 hours north of Phoenix, a place I had always loved, where the red rocks glowed like fire at sunset and the air smelled like juniper and possibility. My husband and I had visited Sedona on our anniversary every year, back when he was alive. We'd hike the trails, eat dinner watching the sunset, talk about maybe retiring there someday. That someday never came for him. But it was coming for me now. Not as part of the couple we'd been, but as the person I was becoming. Independent, autonomous, free. The house hunting process was exhilarating. For the first time in over a year, I made every decision myself. What neighborhood I wanted, what features mattered to me, what I could afford and what fit my lifestyle. The real estate agent tried to involve David a couple times out of habit, asking if my son wanted to see the properties. I shut that down immediately. My son is not involved in this decision, I said firmly. This is my choice. I bought a small house with a garden and a view of the mountains. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me and one for Emma when she visited. The kitchen had windows that caught the morning light. The back patio looked out at Cathedral Rock, that iconic red formation that changed colors throughout the day. It was perfect. Not perfect for a family, or perfect for resale value, or perfect by anyone's standards but mine. Just perfect for me. Moving day was emotional. Marjorie came to help me pack, and Martha drove up from Phoenix to say goodbye. Standing in my house of 30 years, the one I'd raised my children in, the one I'd shared with my husband, I felt the weight of memory. But I also felt ready. This house held ghosts, some beautiful and some painful. I needed a place that was just mine, with no history except what I would create. I joined a hiking group for seniors that met twice a week for moderate trails. The first time I showed up, I was nervous, wondering if I'd be able to keep up, if people would judge me. But the group was welcoming and diverse, people from all walks of life brought together by a love of nature and movement. No one knew my story. No one had preconceptions about who I was or what I could do. I was just Janet, and I could be whoever I wanted to be. I volunteered at the local library, finally returning to the work David had convinced me to give up. They needed someone to help with the weekly children's reading hour, and I discovered I loved it. Reading to kids, seeing their faces light up at a good story, hearing their questions and comments, it filled something in me that had been empty. I made new friends who knew me as Janet, just Janet, not as someone's confused mother or someone who needed help or someone recovering from family trauma. Linda, who led the hiking group and had a laugh like wind chimes. Robert, a widower who volunteered at the library and made terrible puns. Diane, my next-door neighbor who invited me to her book club and introduced me to everyone as my friend Janet, who just moved here from Phoenix. I was just me, and that was enough. More than enough. I was discovering that I actually liked myself, this version of me that was emerging. She was braver than I expected, more resilient, more capable of joy. The fresh start wasn't about running away. It was about choosing myself. For decades, I had defined myself through my relationships, through my roles: wife, mother, caregiver, helper. I had poured myself into those roles until there was nothing left that was just mine. Moving to Sedona was me saying, I matter, my happiness matters, my peace matters. Marjorie visited me a month after I moved. We sat on my back patio, watching the sunset paint the rocks impossible shades of orange and pink. She raised her glass of wine in a toast. To new beginnings, she said. To taking control back, I answered. We clinked glasses, two women who had survived their own children's betrayals and come out the other side stronger. Not undamaged, but stronger. There's a difference. The scars were there, would always be there. But they were proof I had survived something that could have destroyed me. Emma reached out to me 6 months after the move. A carefully written letter arrived in my mailbox, the envelope decorated with stickers and my name written in that careful, oversized handwriting of a child who's still mastering cursive. Inside, she asked if we could talk. Karen was helping her understand what had happened, age appropriately, and she wanted to know her grandmother's side. I held that letter for a long time, feeling the weight of it. This was my granddaughter, my Emma, trying to navigate the wreckage her father had created. I called her that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed. We talked for over an hour. She was so mature for 8 years old, asking questions that cut to the heart of things. Why do grown-ups hurt each other? Why do families fall apart? Is love ever enough to fix things? How do you know when to forgive someone? Her voice was small and confused and trying so hard to understand something that most adults struggle with. I told her the truth, but gently, that sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us. That love doesn't mean accepting bad treatment, even from family. That families can heal, but only if everyone is willing to be honest and do the hard work of change. I didn't want to poison her against her father, but I also wouldn't lie to protect him anymore. She asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you still love my dad? I took a long breath. I love the son I raised, I told her. I love the little boy who used to help me bake cookies and tell me about his day. But the man your father has become, the choices he's made, those are hard for me to reconcile with the person I thought he was. And I can't have a relationship with someone who hurt me the way he did, not unless he truly acknowledges what he did wrong and makes real changes. There was silence on the line. Then Emma said, in a very small voice, Mom says Dad has been mean to her too, that she didn't see it for a long time, but now she does. Is that the same thing? My heart broke for her. Yes, sweetheart, I think it is. I'm sorry he hurt you, Grandma. She was crying now. I miss you. I miss you too, baby. So much. And none of this is your fault. You understand that, right? This is between the adults. You're allowed to love all of us. She seemed to understand in the way children sometimes do, seeing things more clearly than adults clouded by years of justification and excuse-making. She asked if she could visit me in Sedona. I said yes immediately, joy flooding through me. Karen brought her the following month. and we spent a weekend hiking easy trails and making cookies and talking about everything except the drama. Emma loved the red rocks, collected interesting stones, asked a million questions about the geology and the wildlife. She helped me plant herbs in my garden. She curled up next to me on the couch while we read together, her small warm weight against my side, a reminder of what I'd been fighting for. It was healing in a way I hadn't expected. Reclaiming my relationship with my granddaughter on my own terms, without David as the gatekeeper. Karen and I talked too, finding an unexpected kinship in our shared experience of David's manipulation. She was rebuilding her life, going back to school to get her real estate broker's license so she could be fully independent. We were both learning how to stand on our own. Life in Sedona settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for coffee on the patio and reading, afternoons for volunteering or hiking or just existing without anyone's approval, evenings for cooking myself dinner, watching what I wanted on TV, going to bed when I was tired. Simple things. Things I had taken for granted until they were taken from me. Now I treasured them, each moment of autonomy, a small victory. I started writing too. Not a memoir exactly, but reflections on what happened and what I learned, partly for myself to process it all, partly for other people who might be in similar situations and need to know they're not alone, not crazy, not weak for staying as long as they did. I wrote about the psychology of manipulation, how it works, why it's effective, how to recognize it before it destroys you. People asked if I was bitter. The answer was complicated. Yes, I was angry about the time I lost, the health problems, the erosion of relationships. But bitterness requires dwelling in the past, and I was determined to live in the present. David had taken enough from me. I wasn't giving him my future too. I thought a lot about why victims stay in abusive situations. It's easy from the outside to judge, to wonder why someone doesn't just leave. But when you're in it, it's never that simple. There are practical barriers, financial ones, social ones. Fear of what will happen if you leave. Fear of being alone. Fear that no one will believe you. But the biggest barrier is often internal, the self-blame, the belief that if you just try harder, love better, sacrifice more, things will change. That belief is poison. It keeps you chained to situations that are destroying you while you convince yourself you're choosing to stay. Breaking free requires accepting that you didn't cause the abuse, can't control it, and can't cure it. You can only escape it. I learned that the cycle of abuse relies on hope. The abuser gives you just enough good moments to make you believe they can change, that the real them is the loving one, not the cruel one. You cling to those moments, use them to explain away the bad ones. He didn't mean it. He was stressed. He's really good to me most of the time. But patterns don't lie. And David's pattern was clear once I allowed myself to see it. Another thing I learned was about isolation. Abusers isolate their victims, not always physically, but emotionally and socially. They become your whole world, your only source of information and support. That way, when they tell you something is true, you have no other reference point to contradict them. David had methodically cut me off from friends, from activities, from anything that might give me perspective on how abnormal our relationship had become. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something that might help someone out there who is experiencing what I experienced or knows someone who is. The question people always ask is why victims stay. Why don't they just leave? Why do they keep going back? Why do they believe the lies? I used to wonder the same thing before it happened to me. Now I understand. The cycle of abuse is a psychological trap that's incredibly difficult to escape, and understanding that cycle is the first step to breaking free. There are 4 phases to this cycle, and they repeat over and over, creating a pattern that becomes normalized over time. The first phase is tension building. You feel like you're walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace, anticipating the next incident. In my case, this was when David would make subtle comments questioning my judgment or memory. I would try harder to prove I was capable, to avoid giving him ammunition. The second phase is the incident itself, the abuse. It can be a verbal attack, manipulation, financial control, whatever form the abuse takes. For me, it was David telling the family I was declining, trying to get me to sign away my autonomy, isolating me from my support system. These incidents leave you feeling hurt, confused, and often questioning reality. The third phase, and this is the crucial one, is reconciliation. This is when the abuser apologizes or acts loving, promises to change, makes you feel special and cared for. David was brilliant at this phase. After a particularly harsh comment or controlling action, he would bring Emma over, cook my favorite dinner, tell me how much he loved me. This phase is what keeps victims trapped because it gives hope that things will get better. The fourth phase is calm. Things seem normal, even good. You convince yourself the bad times are behind you. But the calm is temporary. The tension starts building again, and the cycle repeats. Each time it repeats, the abuse often gets worse, and your tolerance for it increases because you've been conditioned to accept it. Understanding this cycle helped me recognize I wasn't weak or stupid for staying. I was caught in a carefully constructed psychological trap. David didn't wake up one day and decide to destroy me. He did it gradually, systematically, using a pattern that's been documented by psychologists and therapists for decades. Knowing that, really understanding it, was liberating. It meant my response was normal. My confusion was normal. My difficulty leaving was normal. I wasn't the problem. The cycle was the problem. If you're in a situation like this, or if you know someone who is, please understand that breaking the cycle requires outside intervention. You can't logic your way out of it, or love your way out of it, or try harder your way out of it. You need support from people outside the situation, people who can see the pattern clearly and help you see it too. That's what Dr. Chen did for me. That's what Marjorie did for me. They gave me perspective I couldn't have on my own. And if you're supporting someone in this situation, don't judge them for staying. Don't ask why they don't just leave. That question, however well-intentioned, increases shame and makes it harder for them to reach out. Instead, tell them you believe them. Tell them it's not their fault. Tell them you'll be there when they're ready to leave, however many attempts it takes. Research shows that victims try to leave an average of 7 times before they finally succeed. 7 times. That's not weakness. That's the power of the cycle. Also know that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they try to leave. That's when the abuser realizes they're losing control and may escalate. If you're planning to leave, have a safety plan. Tell people you trust. Document everything. Save money they can't access. Change your passwords. In my case, I was fortunate that David's abuse was primarily psychological and financial rather than physical, so I had more options. But not everyone is that fortunate. One more thing. Self-blame is the abuser's greatest tool. They convince you that if you were just better, smarter, more patient, less difficult, the abuse wouldn't happen. That's a lie. Abuse is always, always, always the abuser's choice. You are not responsible for someone else's decision to hurt you. Say that to yourself as many times as you need to until you believe it. You are not responsible for someone else's decision to hurt you. Learning all this, really understanding the mechanics of abuse and manipulation, gave me something unexpected. It gave me compassion for myself. I had been so angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for being fooled, for sacrificing so much. But once I understood the psychology, I could forgive myself. I did the best I could with the information and support I had at the time. We all do. And when we know better, we do better. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this long, painful story. I know it wasn't easy to hear. It wasn't easy to live. But I needed to tell it. needed to put it into words because stories like mine happen every day to people who think they're alone. You're not alone. If my story helps even one person recognize their own situation or find the courage to speak up, then sharing it was worth it. I want to know where you are right now as you listen to this. What city are you in? What time is it where you are? Are you driving to work? Folding laundry? Lying in bed unable to sleep because something in your own life is weighing on you? Drop a comment and let me know. I want to know my words reached you, wherever you are. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel less alone or helped you understand something you were going through, please hit that like button. It tells me that sharing these difficult personal stories matters, that there's value in speaking truth even when it's painful. I also want to hear from you in the comments. Have you experienced something similar? Have you watched someone you love go through this kind of manipulation and abuse? What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted David publicly or handled it differently? There's no right answer, but I'm curious about your perspective. If you want to hear more real stories like this one, stories about survival and justice and taking control of your life back, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I share a new story every week, and they're all true accounts from real people navigating the messy, complicated reality of family relationships, betrayal, and finding your way back to yourself. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other stories you might find helpful. The first is about a woman whose own mother tried to steal her identity and drain her savings. It's called My Mother Opened Credit Cards in My Name. The second is about a man who discovered his wife had been secretly drugging him. It's called I Found Pills in My Coffee. Both stories show different forms of family betrayal and how the victims found justice and peace. I'm sitting here in my house in Sedona right now, watching the red rocks turn golden in the late afternoon sun. I have a cup of tea next to me, a book I'm excited to read later, and plans to meet friends for dinner. My life is quiet and simple, and mine, all mine. After everything that happened, after the betrayal and the fight and the painful reconstruction, I have peace, real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself, told the truth, and survived. David reached out last month. A brief email asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I will. Maybe someday he'll acknowledge what he did and make real amends, and we can have some kind of relationship again. But that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to myself now, to protect the peace I've built, to honor the woman who fought so hard to reclaim her life. To everyone listening who has survived betrayal by someone you loved and trusted, I see you. I believe you. Your experience was real. Your pain was valid. And your decision to survive, to fight back, to tell your truth, that was brave. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And to those who are still in the middle of their own story, still trapped in the cycle, still wondering if you're crazy or if everyone else is right and you're the problem, please hear this. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You deserve to be